Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. Today we're going to dig into the future with futurist Brian Solis, a best-selling author, digital anthropologist, and recently joined Salesforce as their global innovation evangelist. Brian, Forbes called you one of the most creative and brilliant business minds of our time. Now, I write for them, and they've never called me that, so you must be doing something right here.
Well, I could check the check register and to let you know who I paid off, but yeah, it turns out you could buy your fame. It's 20 years of pushing a boulder uphill, as you know, right? I mean, the technology game is something that is now really starting to hit sort of mainstream awareness, and it wasn't until the last several years that people started to pay attention to to the promise of our work.
So tell me, why did you join Salesforce? And more importantly now, what are you doing there?
Well, before Salesforce, I was an independent digital analyst and anthropologist, and I joined Salesforce because, well, this was before a global pandemic, because the team that I'm part of is, it's my colleagues are people that I've worked with or have admired for the last couple of decades. I mean, my boss is somebody that I used to work with in the late 90s.
That's always good. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an important lesson. Don't burn bridges and always be nice to people. And they were doing some really great work. I've always been focused on innovation at every level. And I had an opportunity to come in as the global innovation evangelist. And it was the right time, the right people. And I jumped in cannonball style.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time to be there. Having sold one of our companies to them a while back, I'm a huge fan of Salesforce and what Mark and his team have done there. We've talked about a lot on the program. So what do you spend most of your time on there? What's an evangelist do?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a big job, right? Because you mentioned Mark. Mark is probably one of the most innovative thinkers in the world. Salesforce is constantly ranked as one of the most innovative companies in the world. And so to come in with that title, you kind of can't take
high
it lightly.
Expectations.
Yeah, exactly. No pressure whatsoever. The work that I'm doing is twofold. One is I continue to do my research externally, and also that thought leadership externally. So sharing observations about where the economy is heading, where innovation itself is heading, how to spark it within larger organizations, how to not just customers, but just get businesses, organizations, governments in general to think differently about how they operated in the past and how they can operate in the future, and then ways that technology can enable that new vision. And then internally, I bring those insights almost as if I was an external person inside the organization to our Ohana, and then also to our customers and prospects to help them think differently. So it's not just about, hey, here are some excellent cloud products and services. It's more like, let's look at the customer, let's look at how markets are changing, and then let's give technology investments a sense of purpose.
Right. Sounds like it sounds like common sense. For those of you that are Googling Ohana, it wasn't a typo. That very much Mark brings almost, I don't know if I call it a Hawaiian culture into the company, but it's very effective. It's not like window dressing, and I really like the way that they get their employees engaged in things, and also allow the employees to do other things outside of work, which is a big part of what we teach at Kellogg. We talked about it a couple of times in the program. What a lot of people probably don't know is, what is a digital anthropologist? What are you digging up? Well, I mean, you have a shovel? What do you got?
That would be a digital archaeologist, I guess. But so here's the truth. Though at the time, this was the mid-late 90s. I had really been inspired by how the consumer internet was so quickly and dramatically changing behaviors that I started to study it in a variety of contexts. So, how would that change shopping? How would that change communications? How would that change family and friend networking? And so I came up with the term digital anthropologist, because essentially it was anthropology and also sociology and ethnography. And that that became a way forward to make sense of the rapid acceleration of technology and its impact on markets and behaviors, because at the time it was unique, right? I mean, you lived in Silicon Valley. It's all technology first. It still is in many cases.
Right.
And when you look at the world through a technology first lens, you get caught up in the punch, you kind of, or the Kool-Aid, and everything is
time.
always about tech. But what we miss is the humanity of those. For example, we could see it profoundly in social networking today, and the role that social networks is playing in politics and in news and in information and misinformation. And so when you can reverse engineer the humanity of it, so the digital anthropology, then we look at social sciences, we can actually understand then how to shape and steer technology in much more innovative and also productive and positive impacts. Now, digital anthropology is its own field of study. It's something studied all around the world, taught all around the world, and it's still something that I hold on to as sort of the epicenter of my work.
Yeah, I like it. It's a lot of people don't kind of sit back and kind of rethink the strategy as it relates to technology. Had a really good discussion with Jesus Mentis the other day with IBM, and he works a lot on humanizing AI, but my comment to him was, technology is great when it's invisible. It's just working in the background, and cell phones don't do that. There's 200 apps doing too many things. It's exhausting. And I still think we're in this tech phase where I'm working for tech on my phone, let's say, instead of it working for me. All the things that companies have talked about for 10 years, back to, the whole smart device thing, it's still coming of age. So a lot of work to do there.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, because that statement that you just made about tech working for you is actually the next horizon of where we need to focus from a level of humanity, not just from business or technology itself. But I think we all got a little consumed, or a lot consumed, by our technology, and it's sort of steering our lives, and we're not necessarily steering our use.
Point. Yeah, if I add up all the time that I spent programming and working on stuff and rebooting things, it's sometimes it's more than actually the benefit you get out of it. It's like the struggle is part of the journey thing. Anyway, so a great example of that is, like, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, probably will be for a while, especially the after effects of it, and it's tough. It's been tough on human loss, most importantly, but also economic loss, and countries are going to be struggling. This is it's going to be a long-term impact. Never has it ever happened at this scale and this level globally, where it was also a connected society, where things spread really quickly. And that, to me, one of the things that I'm concerned about is many of us, whether it's companies or institutions or agencies, whatever it is, we've kind of lost our mojo, I think, in this process. And you talk a lot about, make sure I get this right, that we don't have our defense mechanisms that we normally have, and we don't have our playbook. The playbook's been blown up. There's no playbook, and everyone wakes up, especially on Monday mornings, and they're like, "What am I supposed to do now?" What kind of impacts are you seeing, both at work, and then maybe we'll move into life, because one of your books touches on this pretty well.
The term I gave it is the novel economy, because at the time as the pandemic was hitting, we, for some reason, globally adopted the term the new normal.
Yeah.
And
oh God. Yes.
And
please stop.
and or the next normal. And I refused to.
There's podcasts called that. I'm like, really? That's your okay.
So I wanted to look. I needed to. My work has to focus on outcomes, and both understanding what's happening and then what to do about it. And it's really hard if you're operating under the moniker the new normal. What I had quickly observed, if we go back to March 1st, when that pandemic really started to shut down the global economy,
right.
I realized that and looking at data, because data became really, really key at that moment. I talk about it sort of before COVID BC and after disruption AD, that anything before March 1st, we could throw out the window and start paying attention to what was really clear, that not only were we hitting into a new series of behaviors, that new series of behaviors was going to continue to evolve as the pandemic itself evolved, and as everybody, as human beings sort of reacted to that, and then in terms markets and economies, et cetera. So the novel economy, literally like the novel coronavirus, means new and unusual. And when you're dealing with a novel coronavirus, or a novel economy, there is no playbook, right? That's why it's so disruptive. There are no case studies, best practices, treatments, therapies. So we have to pay attention, we have to study, and we have to invent and learn as we go. And we also have to unlearn. I think that's been a big, big lesson that a lot of the world hasn't learned to unlearn yet. And so the novel economy, then, I broke out into 3 stages. Phase 1 was alive, so business continuity, stabilization, right? And that right there was why we weren't in the new normal. Phase 1 and phase 2, which was survive, says, like, if we have a virus that we cannot contain, that we cannot effectively treat yet, that we cannot prevent against, then that means we're going to be in these phases for at least 18 months, at least. And maybe longer in the United States, because some of us refuse to even believe that the virus is real. But that's going to prolong our recovery. So that means we're in an interim normal, not a new normal. And this interim normal gives companies, gives anybody really the opportunity to think, I came into this, here I am, how do I come out of this? And so what's common is the response is to batten down the hatches, trim costs, you just kind of hunker down and focus on being alive and surviving. But history has shown, and in any time of disruption, that if you start to invest in how the world is changing, right, it's counterintuitive, where you pay attention to look at ways to do things differently, to create new value, you actually come out to phase 3, which is thrive, as a much more innovative, a much more effective competitor, probably depending on what industry you're in, ahead of your competitors, and also starting to invent new opportunities where you're going to invite new competitors to follow you. And that's the way I think about these times, so that I can get my arms around it and put together plans to navigate each of the phases.
And we're seeing that across many industries. We've done a bunch of interviews with companies that are doing that. So as you go through, survive, alive, thrive, it's like you're going from disorientation to orientation, still no rule book. Where's the rule book? There isn't one. To how do you build the next generation? And it's systemic. It's business models, it's competitors, it's everything. And it's causing, and the other thing that I've observed that's going on is CEOs, from a Mark Benioff to, you name it, the CEO of AT&T, they have all jumped down to the front lines of business, bypassed all their channels. Some of these layers of management will probably be eliminated in a lot of these older, big, stodgy companies, because they've realized, why do we do it this way? I mean, they finally have had the time to actually dig down in and look at what's going on and say, why are we doing it this way? Let's do it this way. Let's move in this direction. So I'm seeing some companies, not all, some of them are still what we call BFSs. They're big, fat, and slow, but we're seeing many of them now coming up with a whole new way. Oh yeah, it's part of the Kellogg curriculum, by the way. It's a whole new way to approach their business, and they are becoming a bit more agile. Probably not the agile word you would use in ethnography and design, and it's not that quick. But that is transforming the culture of the company. And what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I'm totally writing down BFS and using that. I'll credit you, of course.
Thank you.
But you're exactly right. Look, a lot of the changes that we're seeing right now, for example, the overnight support of working from home, the overnight support of e-commerce infrastructures, the overnight support of just digitization in general, has been something in play for the last 10 to 15 years. It's not, especially if you go back to
easily. I can show you an ad from the 80s about video conferencing.
I believe it.
Look it up, everybody.
I believe it.
We finally have come of age.
with the acceleration, I think when the first iPhone was introduced,
Yeah.
that's when we really started to say, okay, now things are going to accelerate. But even then, companies were slow to move. You had social media, that again, yet another disruptor that was going to accelerate digitization, not just in work and in consumerism, but just in life.
Right.
And that's when digital transformation as a movement was born. But even then, it was really about modernization. So we'll take all these old, clunky, disparate systems, and we'll modernize that. We'll move to the cloud. We'll mobilize our workforces. But still, it was slow to move.
I think the biggest money makers in that phase was the big four consulting companies writing long reports. I mean, there's a lot of money made about talking about digital transformation, but it's slow to move, and it was expensive too. At least now it's a perfect storm. It is cheaper. If you look at things, it's cheaper, better technology, easier to deploy. Like we were talking about, technology working for the company, not the company working for technology. So maybe the timing has a little bit to do with it.
For sure.
But you're pointing to the pandemic as a global accelerant, both personal as well as business. The Revive Health and Beauty Wellness Index for 2020, depending on what months you look at, March, April, May, June, online usage through retailers and e-commerce sites, up anywhere from 100 to 400%, depending on the category, what type of search it is, whether they're using selfie analytics or AI. I think Salesforce has a similar type of index. What have you guys been seeing?
Yes, the global shopping index is in Q1 and Q2 have been incredibly insightful to show just how rapid digital adoption is. I'll give you a couple of stats. So the last 15 days of Q1 2020, March 15th to March 31st, digital revenue spiked 41%. And you could just tell, play that out, as the pandemic was going to wear on, that was going to be a big deal. And a lot of companies weren't ready for that. A lot of companies weren't ready for curbside or pickup or delivery. And yet you start to see, I'll just throw out a couple Q2 numbers, but you have, despite store reopenings, digital's still growing 71%. You have conversions that show that shoppers are now more intentional than ever, that conversions, meaning that their shopping cart completes, are up 35%.
Right.
If you do offer curbside or pickup options, that's grown 127%. And also, the last thing that I'll share with you that's really interesting is that purchases from social media referrals see the biggest increases in Q2. So that was 104% growth. So it really starts to show that this was already happening, and now it's only accelerated. And the last thing I'll share, and this is the digital anthropologist in me, is that because we have been in this now for over 3 months, on average, psychologists say that it takes 66 days to change behavior into something that's automatic or second nature, right? So
exactly.
This is only going to become the next foundation for phase 2, phase 3 in the novel economy.
Exactly. And we're seeing people now much more addicted to curbside pickup. The companies that have done that well, not just the big brands like Target and Walmart. I mean, those two, they became utilitarian, as well as Amazon, of course, during the pandemic. It was almost like you can't shut them down ever. Whereas the rest of them are like, we're going to shut you down. Interesting decision trees there, but we won't get into the politics of it. But the ones that have brought back curbside, they're developing relationships with customers and changing behavior and trying to steal back share now, because you and I probably have 30 friends right now together that are addicted to Walmart pickup because it actually works. It's easy. It's informative. You don't have to go in. You don't even have to get out of your car. It's and some of those behaviors will stick. And even if there's not a pandemic, it's like, why would I don't want to go and roam around the store right now. I just want to get these 20 things and put them in the back.
That's right. And I'll just share a quick aside, or actually
Sure.
just a note there, that because you could appreciate this from a user experience standpoint, right? If you take those principles and apply it to customer experience, once you experience something that feels great, that's intuitive, you don't have to think about it, whatever it is, that matches how you use other things, right? So if your favorite app, your favorite service, your favorite game, once you start to experience something like that, that is the new standard. You aren't going back, and it starts to push you in wanting more and more experiences like that. You become less patient, you become more demanding. I call today's customers accidental narcissists, because the whole world revolves around you. But then that means that every brand now has to think about, well, then what are the new standards for that experience to be better, right? So, for example, before the pandemic, I had done research through secret shoppers going around the country through curbside, BOPIS, and delivery. And, once someone parks their car, a whole new network of experiences have to come into play that a lot of brands weren't thinking about. Like, do we have dedicated parking? Are there clear directions? Do we have trained staff who can give them that digital-like experience in the physical world? Do we have contactless payments? Do we have a dedicated experience for that's going to be exceptional? And then last but not least, the consumer wants all that within 2 minutes from turning off their car.
Right, exactly. A good example of that is, I'll use Walmart again. So when you show up at curbside, it knows you're there. If your phone's on, obviously. I don't know anyone who turns their phone off anymore. Anybody? It knows you're there, but it's only for curbside pickup. What most stores are still struggling with is how long have they been using the word omni-channel, and they've spent so much money in technology, but the online Dean and the online Brian, when we go into a Target or we go into a Nordstrom's, we're invisible. And sometimes we like to be. It's fine. We don't want everyone tracking us. But being able to take that, all the technology they've spent on, and actually help and guide you from the parking lot in and out of the store quicker, whatever it is, it could be pandemic related. It could just be we want you to spend more money. That's eventually what they're going to get back to. That's another example of technology working for you. But retail's got a long way to go. The other thing we've been seeing in innovation and the research we do at Kellogg and Northwestern around, how do companies partner with startups? So I've got this program called Dancing with Startups that allows large corporations to partner with small ones in a very thoughtful way that actually, like you said, gets stuff done, brings results. But more importantly, how do you kind of take innovation now and turn it into what should we actually build, what should we actually buy, and what should we actually be borrowing? How should we be partnering with companies? Seems to be spiking now post-pandemic. But I also see the next wave of buying, acquisitions. There's so many, let's just say, cheap companies out there now, valuation-wise, that I think the shopping lists of different companies are going to increase. But you pointed out another thing but they also have higher expectations on returns. It's like, why are we doing this? We need to do this for a specific, reason. So I guess there's three questions in there. One is just, how is the shift to the novel economy changing creativity and innovation? And then how does that kind of play out in terms of, what should I be building, buying, borrowing? What's your thought there?
All right. So let me play this out because I want to introduce.
We'll have to add an extra hour to the podcast. Sorry.
I want to add just one more element, that the novel economy. One other area where I'm paying attention to is the human side of transformation.
Perfect.
And before COVID or BC, I had talked about for the last decade Generation C, or Generation Connected, that had demonstrated that anybody who really lives a digital lifestyle, phone always on, it's how they communicate, it's how they shop, it's how they order food, that you would go through the customer journey much differently. And then you could also play that out, that you learn differently, your brain is rewired differently, your relationships are started and maintained differently in all aspects of life. And so I could show that in any variety of contexts, how the Generation C was the customer to design for, because it wasn't going to go backwards, like we talked about earlier. Once you experience something so quick, convenient, personal, that's the standard, and you want more of that, and you look to every industry.
Now, wasn't that your book, WTF? Did that stand for what? Wait a minute. What is that? What does that stand for?
What's the future?
Don't hide from the camera there. Get back there.
I totally put that as the title so that I could get WTF on the cover of the book.
I love it.
And it was, the joke was at the time trying to get executives to see Generation C and appreciate them for what it represented to their business in the future. It was until the pandemic a difficult conversation to have all those years. And so I wrote a book to get people to see then, from a journey perspective, what they were missing from an opportunity cost. So I could say it's not just about the ROI. It was, what's the return on ignorance? What are the costs? What are the costs that you could put into to get out of what you're not getting today, and what would that yield you in terms of net revenue that you're missing? And then that Generation C concept was accelerated because of the pandemic. So, what I'll just give you a kind of a bridge between Generation C and what I'm going to introduce as Generation N. For the last several years, I had been studying, for example, a bunch of different ways to show you how much once you live a digital lifestyle, you keep pushing forward in terms of what your standards are for engagement. So one study was in New York, how long was too long to wait for an Uber before you opened the Lyft app? And that number
in New York,
yeah,
they can't measure time that small.
exactly. That number went down so fast every year. I think the last time I did that study was 6 minutes. That was just too long to wait for a car to come to you, and the reason why I showed that was because that if you now, whatever industry you're in, if you're in retail, for example, or if you're in food delivery, you're competing against that mindset of a customer that wants things now. I also studied what other things did Uber trigger in terms of trends. One trend that just blew people's minds. Again, I don't know if this is post-pandemic, but pre-pandemic, people were calling Ubers instead of 911 when they had to go to the emergency room because it was cheaper and faster. So when
totally makes sense. Yep. Generation C.
Totally makes sense, right? So to them, that's totally normal. So now you take that and you shut down the economy. And then you, as Generation C, you're already digitally native. So if you have to shop first or work from home, you're already there mentally. But now you're going to bring a whole new subset of people who weren't really digital first, or maybe digital sometimes. That grows Generation C, makes it a huge accelerant to the fact that you have to be a digital business now. You have to be a digital first business. And
that target, those of you listening in, actually it's many of you listening in, is that kind of the laggard baby boomer generation. It's like, I'm on my phone, like, yeah, I'm going to order that later when I'm on my computer. It's like, you just order it now.
Yeah.
But they would wait till they go upstairs at night to their computer to do the computery stuff. And that's what we've seen. Is it like that?
Right. Yeah, and now smartphones, not only is it them going on their computers, it's them going on their smartphones, right? And then you bring to that the whole transformation, the human transformation process that happens once you use your smartphone as the main screen. And then lastly, this name I gave the new generation is Generation N, Generation Novel, because now you have a bigger set of digital first customers, and that's only growing, right? You have 66 days at least where that's becoming automatic behavior, the new standard. But lastly, what changes this between Generation C is the somatic marker that is COVID-19. So now you have digital first behaviors bound by an emotional core of people who are feeling great anxiety, stress, worry, much like World War II, for example. If we have gone and will continue to go through incredible emotional experiences where looking at an empty roll of toilet paper might actually have an emotional reaction to it, like, oh my gosh, I will never use toilet paper the same way again. I will never take sanitizer for granted again. So now you have this emotional marker and these digital behaviors, and essentially what you have is a foundation for innovation, right? And innovation in its truest sense. And then give me just one more minute and then I'll throw it back to you, which is I've also had to make clear to executives the difference between iteration and innovation, because often when we hear the word innovation, we think, okay, we'll add AI, we'll add machine learning, and we'll be much more innovative. Essentially, though, what we're doing is we're just kind of incrementally improving existing processes and systems and thinking. But what I'm asking with Generation N is that we have a totally new customer. We have a totally new market. We have no playbook to operate with in the novel economy. So this is a time for innovation, which is if iteration is doing new things that improve previous things, right, or make the existing things better, innovation is creating new value. Right? You need both. And this is an opportunity to understand then from a human-centered perspective of where we can add value through data, now knowing all of the signals that people are sharing, all of the behaviors and trends that we're seeing. how someone feels and where we can add value, where we can make incremental improvements that enhance that value, so that we can become more innovative as not just from a mindset, but from a heart set as well.
Right. You've spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, like I did. I'm sure we're in the same meetings together. We just maybe had different hairdos back then. Who knows? And have worked with thousands of startups like me. So just touch a little bit on the partnering side. When you look at Build, Buy, Borrow, a lot of the large corporations now, 10 years ago it started pretty much, but now some of them are comfortable with partnering with startups. Some still have a lot to learn, and we try to help them do that. But what are you seeing out there in terms of the attitude of Silicon Valley and how it's taken a hit, I think, inspirationally over the last year about not being the center of the universe anymore? Personally, I still think it is one of them, and it is a big one, right? But curious to your thoughts about, just tacking on to your last answer, which was we need to drive growth and innovation and creativity very differently than we used to, because now we have a whole new set of behaviors. But where does that leave startups?
Well, leave startups in depending on if you're optimist or pessimist. I think it leaves them in a really incredible position. I'm a hopeless optimist. Before the pandemic, and I'm sure you've seen this. You had a not invented here syndrome where companies really felt the need to build. If they couldn't build, then it was an acquisition. Partnerships were really more about corporate venture strategies, not necessarily about real application, or at least more. They were more long tail, let's just say.
Yes.
But now in a pandemic, I think not only are we seeing behaviors or long-term trends accelerated, I think we also have to look at build versus buy. And buy could be something as simple as an acquire hire to build, or to bring in something that's close to or fully functional and where that vision's going. So corporate vision, in terms of innovation, has to be in place. It's not often in place, right? So that's a function of the question you're asking. Partnership too is really huge. So, but every one of those, whether it's build, buy, or partner, has to have intent. And this, I think, is where it needs to start. What are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? And this is, again, why human-centered experience design has to be front and center. Because if we're going to grow every aspect of business, from brand to product to service to operations, is up for reinvention. And in your build, buy, partner, or build, buy, borrow, that applies to every aspect of the organization. So I implore executives to form a roundtable, a board of directors, a cross-functional stakeholder group, whatever you want to call it. Let's reset. Let's assess where we are and where we're trying to go. Where are we really trying to go? Let's get some inputs to see where we are and where we're not. And then let's look at it as a multimodal approach. I don't have a better name for this one yet. I'm working on it, Dean.
Multimodal.
Which is
that's a tongue twister.
Yeah, which is essentially saying, okay, digital transformation is now a given, right? So it's a commodity. So let's break it into a few different parts. One is, where can we iterate and innovate in terms of operational excellence? Right. So, and then where can we iterate and innovate in terms of digital business model innovation? You have a whole new world of opportunities now before you. It's not just about digitizing e-commerce. That's operationalization. It's about introducing new touch points, introducing new products and services that are going to cater to Gen N in a way that we just didn't see before. And lastly, the multimodal aspect of it is, the center of it is your employees and your customers. They're the ones feeling, behaving, acting, thinking differently. They have different hopes, aspirations, and fears. And let that inspire you, because it's gonna, I call it data-driven empathy. It's actually humanizing data right now in ways that give you that sense of purpose for all of those directions.
Yeah, and a lot of the CEOs I talked to, I said, in any good downturn, it's actually a great time to not just think big, but think totally differently. You can create a new category of business that doesn't even exist. So that's taking business models and kind of turning it on its head. I love your comments about, user experience design, whatever the latest buzzword is now, but human-centered design. Just full disclosure, I was chairman of a company called Okta that we sold to Salesforce and kind of got them deeply into that area, and it looks like it's alive and well. It's a good thing you're there and and helping them out. It's I love your insights and your books. So really want to thank you for being on the program. Maybe just to close out, just touch on your other two books, X and then Life Scale. Those are kind of a series, aren't they?
Well, WTF and X were like a.
That's my favorite title. You have to send me a signed copy of WTF.
Of course I will. X was about experience design, which was saying it takes the concept of human-centered design and says, and it's actually more relevant today than it was then, which is how do you design an experience? And I had to break it down to the word experience, which is essentially an emotional and intellectual reaction to a moment. And we let experiences go take for granted. If you hit a website, if you talk to an agent, wherever you are in the journey, that's an experience. And they all add up. And that whatever they add up to is the customer's experience. And however they remember it and talk about it is the brand. And so it was taking sort of this backwards in approach to thinking about the future of business from an experiential design perspective. And the book itself taught you how to create experiences. And the book itself was an experience to show metaphorically how to design an experience. So I went and I reimagined what could a book be today. Doesn't necessarily have to be what we've always seen for the last several thousand years. It could be something. What if I took digital and wanted to turn it into paper? What insights could I use, knowing how someone retains information, short attention spans, et cetera, and actually redesigned the book itself. We got rid of a table of contents. We got rid of traditional chapter structures. I changed how I write. I found ways to communicate a paragraph visually. So a lot of really interesting innovations went into showing how to use the principles of the book, to design whatever you want. And then Life Scale, which is the latest one, has nothing to do with that. It was
perfect.
it was a lot of insights that had come out of that experience. Also with WTF. Because I had been studying how digital had affected how our brains were wired, how we made decisions, how we retained information, et cetera. It led to a lot of deeper research to show, well, if it's changing us, how much is digital changing us as human beings? And it turns out that it's quite extensive. It led to all kinds of things of phones becoming sort of mechanisms for addiction-like behaviors, rewiring our brains to the inability to dive deep in terms of deep creativity, flow, et cetera, taking us off course in terms of where we think our life is going to go because we lose ourselves every single day with how much time we spend on these devices, not necessarily as productively as we think they are. And so I had to study then if this is the way digital is rewiring us, right? Meaning that digital is in control and I'm not in control, then how do I rewire it so that I'm in control using technology to get me to where I want to go aspirationally? So I had to study how to break down the existing changes to build up using it's called persuasive design, using those same persuasive design techniques that change our behaviors in ways that are actually much more productive and positive. And so that's Life Scale.
Yeah, that's good. And then to close it, if you could give the listeners and viewers one piece of advice on how do you change your relationship with these cell phones, what would it be? Because I'm listening.
Well,
the addiction thing. You're right about that.
I wish it was an easy answer. I
know
we're
don't
closing
take it.
out.
Don't take it in your bedroom at night because that's a time killer and an eye burner.
Well, be mindful and intentional about how you're going to use it. For example, ask yourself, what am I getting out of this right now? Because what you end up finding is that we tend to get caught up in this endless scroll of hoping this is why persuasive design wins. For example, one of the techniques they use mimics slot machine like design. Every time you reach for your phone and you scroll, you feel like you're going to win something.
Exactly. Yes.
And so that's one of the triggers that's used to make it addictive. I think it's just a matter of questioning.
I actually thought that's what the purpose was. That wasn't it. I mean, one thought leader says, Dean, you don't take it so seriously. You just laugh and scroll. It's just entertainment. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Go.
Man. Yeah. There's no easy answer to it other than to just really start questioning what's the relationship you have with it and what are you getting out of it. Like in any relationship, really, it's got to be mutually beneficial. Right now, it's incredibly one-sided, and we're made to believe that we're actually it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, sounds like we could do a whole episode on that. You've been listening to Brian Solis from Salesforce. Brian, thanks for coming. Good to see you, and
Thank you.
take care of yourself out there.
You too.